Number 9. James Joseph DRESNOK. Like many kids who grow up without a stable home, James Joseph DRESNOK joined the U.S. Army after he finished high school in hopes of getting on the right path and establishing a better life for himself. During the early 1960s, he was stationed on the South Korean side of the 38th parallel, which separates the country from its communist neighbor to the north. DRESNOK soon found that while the military provided structure, it came with what he felt was a lack of freedom. One day, he decided that he was fed up with his life as he knew it. He deserted his post and crossed over into North Korea, where he was arrested and taken to Pyongyang for questioning. It was a split-second, yet irreversible decision. Once DRESNOK was in North Korean custody, he no longer had control of his future. He and 3 other American defectors spent years learning the rogue state's culture, language, and ideology while under the watchful eye of their minders. They tried escaping once through the Russian embassy, but were promptly turned back over to the North Koreans. Eventually, they gained citizenship and the privileges that came along with living in Pyongyang, where the most loyal citizens are given a relatively nice existence compared to those who live in the countryside. DRESNOK became famous for playing the role of an American villain in propaganda films. He married and fathered 3 children, and the government took care of him until his dying day. In the 2006 documentary, Crossing the Line, he said that he didn't regret defecting to North Korea, but even if he did, he would have been punished for admitting it, leaving one to wonder if DRESNOK simply made the most of his circumstances after making a life-changing choice that he couldn't take back. Number 8. Leslie J. LINDOR. Leslie J. LINDOR was a staff sergeant for the U.S. Army's Criminal Investigation Division at Fort Hood, Texas. In 2018, his 34-year-old wife, Rachel, was found dead. An investigation found that months earlier, LINDOR had set out on a quest to acquire a fatal neurotoxin called tetrodotoxin, which is found in pufferfish and several other marine species. He told his commander that he was traveling to Florida, but instead went to Haiti to meet someone face-to-face to discuss getting the toxin. LINDOR allegedly tried to poison Rachel several times, leading up to her death, including on 2 occasions where he put powder in her shoes and on the seat of her car. He also put the poison in his wife's water and food during a trip to Haiti. The plan eventually succeeded, sparking a joint investigation by the CID and the local police department. Several months later, detectives arrested LINDOR on a slew of charges, including Rachel's murder, as well as misusing government information systems to track criminal complaints and interfere with the investigation into himself. He ultimately took a plea deal, which involved pleading guilty to the murder charge, along with stalking, disobeying a warrant officer, conspiracy to commit murder, and 3 counts of attempted murder. LINDOR was dishonorably discharged from the military and sentenced to 70 years in prison. Number 7. The MARSOC 3. On New Year's Eve 2018, 2 decorated Marine Forces Special Operations Command, MARSOC, raiders, and a Navy corpsman were confronted by an extremely drunk civilian contractor named Richard Rodriguez outside a drinking establishment in Kurdistan, Iraq. Rodriguez had been kicked out of the establishment for being aggressive towards one of the men, known as the MARSOC 3. He waited outside for them to leave and began punching Gunnery Sergeant Danny Dreyer in the face. Gunnery Sergeant Josh Negron stepped in and dropped Rodriguez with a single punch. Footage of the disturbing encounter shows Rodriguez's friends fleeing the scene, leaving the MARSOC 3 to care for the man through the night. Despite their differences, the men did the right thing and took Rodriguez back to the base. At some point during the night, he became unresponsive. Navy Chief Petty Officer Eric Gilman performed life-saving measures on Rodriguez, who was rushed to a hospital in Germany. He died 4 days later after choking on his own vomit. In what many describe as one of the biggest military injustices in history, the MARSOC 3 are facing a host of charges, including negligent homicide, involuntary manslaughter, obstruction of justice, and dereliction of duty. Defense attorneys are arguing that the soldiers acted in self-defense and are trying to get a judge to dismiss the charges entirely. If convicted, the men will be dishonorably discharged and could spend over 20 years behind bars. Number 6. Marriage proposal misstep. The Nigerian military has a policy against engaging in romantic behavior while in uniform. A female soldier was recently arrested for violating that rule when she accepted a marriage proposal while on duty. She found herself in hot water after footage of her accepting the ring surfaced on social media, but people were quick to criticize the military for punishing the woman. A spokesperson from the Women Empowerment and Legal Aid Group accused the Army of discriminating against the soldier noting that men have done similar things without getting in trouble. Human rights activist and former Nigerian presidential candidate Omoyele Sowore called the move misogynistic. The proposal came from a trainee from the National Youth Service Corps, the government's mandatory year-long youth training scheme. The program involves learning under the Army and is presumably how the couple met. Many people were happy for the couple and offered their congratulations after seeing the heartwarming video. Unfortunately, the woman's superiors disagreed, pointing out that her job was to train the recruits, not to get romantically involved with them. Number 5. The disappearance and death of Vanessa Guillen. U.S. Army soldier Vanessa Guillen was just 20 years old when she disappeared from Fort Hood, Texas on April 22, 2020. Her dismembered remains were found over 2 months later along the Leon River. Shortly thereafter, another enlisted soldier named David Robinson fled Fort Hood. The 20-year-old fatally shot himself while police tried to apprehend him on suspicion of murdering Vanessa. Robin's girlfriend, 22-year-old Cecily Aguilar, was accused of helping him destroy and burn Vanessa's body. She is facing numerous federal charges related to her alleged role in the crime. It later came to light that before Vanessa vanished, she had told her family that a sergeant was sexually harassing her. She also began to lose weight and appeared increasingly stressed and unhealthy. Other female soldiers had complained about the same individual, but the reports were overlooked. Vanessa had reassured her mother that she could handle the problem on her own, and she opted against making a formal complaint. After her remains were discovered, her family criticized the Army's handling of the investigation, which soon fell under widespread public scrutiny. An independent civilian panel found numerous issues with how the investigation was carried out, including a slew of rookie mistakes among highly inexperienced detectives. They had failed to thoroughly investigate Robinson in the immediate aftermath of Vanessa's disappearance, and chose not to get to the bottom of blatantly conflicting stories and details from other people they interviewed. The investigators even struggled to articulate the probable cause needed to obtain warrants. It wasn't until Major General Scott Eflin began looking into whether the CID had enough resources and expertise that these problems became clear. Sadly, the investigative shortcomings didn't start with Vanessa's case. A closer look revealed a troubling pattern of botched investigations, wasted resources, and fruitless pursuits within the department. Last year, the Army announced plans to restructure its CID and improve its policies to prevent history from repeating itself. Number 4. James MAULT. It's been a little over a year since a mob of several thousand people stormed the U.S. Capitol in a violent rage, resulting in 5 deaths and numerous injuries. Not everyone who was involved in the insurrection was arrested right away. In fact, it took the authorities a while to track down many of the rioters. An Army veteran named James MAULT was among these who managed to fly under the radar in the immediate aftermath of the rebellion. He left active duty as a sergeant in 2016. From then until 2020, he served as a combat engineer in the New York Army National Guard. After the attack on the Capitol, MAULT decided to rejoin the Army. When the law finally caught up with him late last year, he was stationed at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. He was the 6th person who was a member of the military at the time of these arrests, but he was the first military member who wasn't enlisted when they participated in the riot. In a statement to CBS News, Army spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Gabriel Ramirez explained that the Army was unaware of MAULT's involvement in the insurrection and any other information that would have disqualified him from re-enlisting. Ramirez also reassured the public that the Army conducts thorough background checks and other screenings to weed out applicants who don't belong in the service. Unfortunately, MAULT managed to weasel his way past these steps. The Army said that it was cooperating with the FBI to improve the pre-screening process. But the FBI reportedly knew of MAULT's involvement shortly after the attack. They apparently just didn't get around to arresting him until months later, when investigators charged him with a slew of violent crimes, including assaulting officers and spraying them with chemicals. MAULT argued that he simply got caught up in the crowd as it pushed closer and closer to the Capitol building, giving him no choice but to move in with everyone. Prosecutors, on the other hand, are accusing MAULT and his co-defendant of pushing their way to the front of the crowd. He's currently behind bars while he awaits his trial. Number 3. Dwayne Hall. One pedestrian recently died and another was seriously injured in Savannah, Georgia, when they were hit by a vehicle that was fleeing from the police. Officers had tried to pull over the red Dodge Charger after it was speeding, but the driver refused to comply, and a chase ensued. The police ultimately decided to end their pursuit per the department's policies and for safety reasons. It wasn't until after the chase ended that the vehicle struck 2 victims, killing 40-year-old Brandon Hamby. The motorist fled the scene. Horrified onlookers said that the crash sounded like an explosion and that it was immediately followed by screaming. Acting on a tip several days later, police found a vehicle with damage consistent with the collision. It belonged to a soldier named DUANE Rico Hall, who was stationed at nearby Fort Stewart. The Georgia State Patrol brought him in for questioning, and he reportedly confessed to the deadly hit and run. Hall is currently being held in the county jail as he faces a first-degree vehicular homicide charge. An investigation into the incident is ongoing. In the meantime, locals are calling for improved safety measures to protect the increasing number of pedestrians in the area. Number 2. Stuart Scheller Jr. Former Marine Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller stoked heated controversy last year when he posted a series of videos of himself in uniform, harshly criticizing the American military's abrupt withdrawal from Afghanistan. The Marine of 17 years recorded his first viral complaint in August after 13 U.S. servicemen were killed in a suicide bombing attack in Kabul. In his videos, he called out high-ranking officials and demanded accountability for what he felt was a flawed departure from a country. Scheller was court-martialed for his controversial posts. He voluntarily resigned from the Marine Corps as the case worked its way through the military's justice system. In the meantime, several politicians testified in support of the disgraced ex-soldier, who had a remarkable record up until he started posting the videos. He also received support from fellow veterans in the U.S. and in Iraq and Afghanistan. Scheller pled guilty to 9 violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, including contempt toward officials, disrespect toward superior commissioned officers, willingly disobeying a superior commissioned officer, dereliction of duty, and failure to obey order or regulation, and unbecoming conduct. Colonel Glenn Hines, the judge who presided over the case, took Scheller's impeccable record into consideration when deciding his sentence. He reprimanded the former Marine and ordered him to forfeit $5,000 of his pay. Scheller's attorney told USA Today that he and his client were very satisfied with the outcome and that he thought the judge's decision was very fair. Although Scheller's conduct effectively ended his military career, it's true that things could have turned out much worse. At the outset of the trial, he was facing the possibility of having to forfeit 2/3 of his pay every month for a year. He also managed to avoid a dishonorable discharge. And number 1, controversial COVID video. A man claiming to be a German soldier was recently arrested after posting a video containing threats on social media. The off-putting footage showed the self-proclaimed staff sergeant ordering the military to lift COVID-19 restrictions and cancel a planned vaccine mandate for service people. He demanded an answer by the following day and firmly stated, "This is a warning." But the authorities weren't about to cave to the man's requirements. Instead, they arrested him in Munich amid a protest against coronavirus policies. In a tweet, the German Defense Ministry accused the suspect of making unacceptable threats against the state and said that they were in the process of examining the potential consequences. There's no room for someone like him in the country's military, according to Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht, who wrote that armed forces need people who stand firmly by Germany's constitution. She further stated that anyone who lacks these values has no place in the military. Germany isn't the only place where people are starkly divided when it comes to their opinions of how the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic should be handled. And while it's not as simple of labeling one school of thought as right and the other as wrong, there's certainly no need to act aggressive and threatening. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more about shocking cases where soldiers went wrong, let me know in the comments and be sure to subscribe. See you next time.